Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of a riveting podcast from the Middle Road. This is Nishant Malhotra, founder of Middle Road OPC Private Limited. The Middle Road is enabling social change and impact within the society and sustainable development globally. Today, I will chat with Mr. Gurendra Kasmalkar on how technology is enabling social change and impact. During our discussion, we will chat about importance of accelerators within the startup ecosystem and disruptive technologies including artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain and their social impact. Mr. Gurendra, a very warm welcome to the Middle Road and look forward to our conversation.
So much, Nishant. It's great to be here and I really appreciate your inviting me to do this interesting discussion. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So I'll just have a very brief introduction.
Gurendra is the founding director and CEO of Ideas to Impacts Innovation Private Limited. He is also the lead investor and general partner at Pentathlon Ventures and owner of Ideas to Impacts Innovation Center. Idea to Impacts Innovation Center is one of the leading incubators, accelerators of technology startups in India. Ideas to Impacts is also in the business of distributing the future evenly by offering cutting-edge technology services through their Smart Town model. Pentathlon Ventures funds and supports early stage business to business, that is B2B technology startups in India. He is mechanical engineer from IIT Mumbai and University of South Carolina, USA. He has worked extensively in the technology sector, is a senior entrepreneur and founded Verisoft, one of India's earliest and leading independent testing companies. Actively involved in various industry forums. Currently is a charter member of TIE and member of Social Innovation Group of the Pune International Center.
Yes.
So you
can call me Giri, Nishant. That's what everybody calls me.
Okay. So Giri, so let's start with the first. You're doing very exciting work. Now you're enabling sustainable innovation in the technology sector through your work in LOT or doing artificial intelligence and machine learning. So these terms would keep coming, and we'll dwell into that also at a later stage in depth. But what I'm keen to understand is how your the work predominantly at Impacts Hub, which is one of the largest accelerator incubators in India, how it is impacting the sustainable sector, or how is it impacting the social sector, especially the startup ecosystem. So please do share your philosophy in this sector, and how different are you from other incubators, accelerator within this sector?
Great, excellent. First of all, let me start with our fund that you mentioned. So as a fund, it's an early stage fund. You mentioned that. Now, the philosophy was that if a fund is an early stage one, then it has to have an incubator go along with it. A fund and incubator to us go hand in hand. The reason is simple. The early stage startups that we are wanting to help, they need a lot of mentoring. They need access to market. They need access to funds, of course. They need even access to talent, right? They would like to meet other entrepreneurs, for example, because as you know, a lot of things happen just by serendipity. And that is where we feel that for that early stage, a fund and accelerator incubator has to go hand in hand. That was the thinking behind starting the Ideas to Impacts Hub. Of course, it's an excellent facility. It's an excellent working space. But the key thing there is there are startups, about 30 of them, about 350 techies sitting there. They are startups that are one-person startup to 40 people startup that are there, right? So that's what I meant by the opportunity to mingle for new startups with some very seasoned guys. Some of these our startup founders are actually having prior exits. They have investors and so on. So these are the people you just kind of run into when you're in the build. So that's what I mean by not just being a facility, but a place which can become an actually hub. And that's why we called it the Ideas to Impacts Hub, actually. That it is actually creating an entire ecosystem. We have mentors associated with our hub. We have different advisors that are coming from the fund side, for example. And as you yourself have seen, there are lots of events that happen in this building. Now, pre-COVID, those events used to be in the building. And there were about 100 of them that have happened so far, just in a little more than a year of its inauguration. But now with COVID, we are doing those events online, and we are getting international speakers to speak and so on. So that's the kind of hub that we have built for the tech startup. So it is the people, it is the companies, and it is the events. It's a complete ecosystem. And that, I feel, is the difference that you are asking for. It is not just another building. It's a complete ecosystem. Baner, as you know, in Pune is a big hotspot for tech. And within that, we have created a big hotspot for the tech startups. That's how we look at the building.
So thank you. Just from our audience, Pune is a major city in Maharashtra in India. Just to give that fact. About early stage fund, how early are you going in? You want to come as a gap in between seed and angel. I would say that's where you're targeting. As
seed is what we are looking at when we say early. See, there is. I mean, typically when we started this fund, we saw a few gaps that we were trying to address. Now, one of the gaps was that, first of all, we were in Pune. I've been very active in the startup ecosystem, but Pune did not have a fund. So that was one of the gaps that we were trying to address. All the funds happened to be in Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi. So we wanted to have a fund that was Pune headquarters. Second was a lot of, at that time, the focus was on B2C, for example. So we wanted to do B2B. B, at least 4 years now back, was not supported. And the third one was the stage, the question that you are asking. There was a lot of active angel community, and then there was seen by being the seed. So as a seed, we would take a startup that has, some revenues. They have a product in the market, they are generating some revenues, early revenues, and we would like to take them from that stage to a series A kind of a stage, where then they can go on to the next growth phase. So that is the kind of stage that we're looking at. So we would call ourselves seed or pre-series A, that kind of a stage where there is a product, there are some early revenues, but we are not at the growth stage yet, and we would like them to take them to the series A kind of a stage. So that is the general stage that we are operating at.
Thanks. I'll just ask a very small tangential question before we go to the startup. And you explained, you're very articulate in what you did. Now, I presume like you look at early avenues, but you look at a very sustainable model. Now, do you have a sort of a KPI, key performance indicator, or a matrix which you look at and say, okay, this is what I want in a company? Is something which you give a preference?
Sure. I mean, clearly we are talking about the early stage. So which means the founders is one of the most important things that you can look at. See, the fact is, Nishant, that you can have all the business plans and so on, that everybody submits your decks and the business plans for the next 5 years and so on. One thing is very certain about these business plans, that they will not be executed as they are. The plans will change. The startups are at a stage where it is a given that same plan, when nothing much is in place, you cannot really predict or project how you're going to be in 5 years' time. What we're looking at is the general direction that you're looking at. But the biggest factor is the founders. Now we look at multiple things in the founders. First of all, obviously the founders have to be very enthusiastic. They must have a lot of hunger and all of that. Those soft things are obviously, and you find them. But we also look at, for example, the mix that you have among the founders. Is there technology skills? Is there hustle, the business kind of skills? And very importantly, is there domain knowledge of the problem that you're trying to solve? So we look at these founders very closely. Then the second part comes is, what kind of market you're looking at. I mean, clearly for our fund, even if it is an early stage, for us to get returns, the company has to go to Series A and Series B and beyond. So that means that probably the company has to go global. So whatever problem that they're solving, even if they're solving it in India, that must have a global opportunity. So that market and that kind of what is called the total addressable market has to be there. There has to be an opportunity for the product to go global. And then we come to what kind of solution that they're thinking of. Whether the solution has a good technology backing to it, whether it can scale, and so on and so forth. But with the caveat that we know that there are going to be pivots that are going to happen, and hence the founders have to be good enough to understand when they need to pivot, and accordingly see the market and accordingly change their path. So roughly there are these three things that we look at: the founders, the market and the solution that they're building.
Okay, oh, great. You've been very specific and great clarity to people. How do you go about, especially in the early stage? There's a lot of uncertainty out of the revenues, and you're very correct that it's very difficult to take a call 5 years down the line. Now, and you've done something which is like one of the major enablers is get funding, to especially early startups, and that's one of the major reasons why they fall down to the death valley. So we now talk about Indian government as the president wants to invest about 10,000 crores now under the Startup India Vision Plan 2024. Now, what sort of improvements have you seen? You've been in this sector for a long period of time. You've been a serial entrepreneur. You had entrepreneurs before, and you started businesses in different segments in technology, but maybe in different sectors within the technology domain. So when you talk about what sort of qualitative and quantitative differences you have observed over the years in the startup ecosystem in India? I mean, especially in technology.
Absolutely. I mean, it has changed so dramatically that I sometimes feel fortunate that the period of my career kind of matched with the way things changed in India. So if you look at it, I started my career in way back in '89, and in the '90s when I first started my first business, it was in services. It was software services, right? At that time, the word startup was also not there. So basically, you got into business, you started some consulting or services business. It was in only the 2000s that products started to happen. Otherwise, the big knock on all of us was you're not doing nothing original. You're just servicing the customers in the US and so on and so forth. We all had very successful businesses. My own business, as you are aware, was in the software testing space, and it grew really very well. It became one of the earliest and then the largest pure play testing companies in India. But it was services companies. It's only in the mid 2000s and later that products started to come in, and there were reasons for that. The US started coming back to India. They had out of India. Now, if you remember that in that early period of maybe 2010 or around that period, the products that were getting built were actually a lot of them were B2C products, because everybody thought that India being such a large population, obviously B2C has to have a play. So the simple thing was that whatever was being built globally, you make an Indian version of it. Now whether it is Ola or Flipkart or whatever it is, you build those models in India, and obviously because of Indian population and Indian consumers, those will be successes. So initial wave was all B2C, but that got the startup ecosystem on a big role in India. Now the very interesting thing that has happened now is that that time a lot of funds also came from outside of India. You heard of SoftBank, large funds, all they came from outside of India, and those were the ones which were mainly funding the B2C. As I mentioned earlier, B2B is a very recent phenomenon. So now after the B2C phase, now when we started, there were hardly any B2B companies, but now it's very interesting that in the last 3-4 years, B2B funds have started coming up, as well, and that's a very, very, very good sign. So that's a validation of something that we were trying to do. The other thing that has also happened now is instead of just Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, within India now different centers have started coming up. So we have started this fund in Pune, and we have actually looked at investors from Hubli even for our fund in Pune. So we are looking at even smaller centers. I've gone to places like Surat and Nagpur for the similar reason. So that kind of a spread has already started happening. So you see the changes that have happened are on multiple dimensions. So services to products, B2 to first B2C, then B2B, funds coming from outside, funds coming from India, not just the metros, but also from smaller cities. So a lot of different dimensions of changes that have happened. But the biggest change that I see, and I must mention this, is the founders. The kind of founders that we see, you would be surprised to know that at our fund today, we are looking at something like 50 to 60 startups every month. That's the kind of deal flow that we are talking about. So you can imagine the kind of energy, the kind of deal flow that is happening. And the founders that we meet are also very confident, very technologically savvy, and it is the quantity and quality both are very, very impressive. And that to me is the biggest change and the most impressive change that has happened in the startup ecosystem in the last few years.
Oh, okay. So thanks. It was a very enlightening, perspective which you have given. Yeah, I do. And you talked about a very good point. You're going to like tier three cities, and that's where my next question comes in. I think that's where a lot of social impact is coming, because maybe metro and non-metro, prime cities like Pune have already started coming in, but you have a model which is low cost, smart town model. And in this, you go to a small town, you open up small town technology centers in like tier three cities. You talked about Satara, Kolhapur, etc. So would you like to sort of comment how you're integrating the model in non-metro cities? What sort of matrix do you make sure that the quality standards where you have, example, like people with skill sets are on par with the very best in the world? And that will be, I think, a bit of a trade-off. Or do you think there is a trade-off there, or you say, no, we still are able to manage the best in India?
Definitely, very good question. I'll be very happy to answer that. See, as I mentioned, my background came from IT services, and when I got my last exit in 2016, I was of course thinking of what to do next. In the last company, we had already grown to about 1,000 people, right? And the trigger for me to start, my new activity was this: that the observation that out of these 1,000 people, more than 500 actually came not from Pune, but from the smaller towns outside of Pune. And this is true not just for my company. You take almost any company in Pune or any metro for that matter, you'll find that this to be the case. Now, what that means is that the colleges and the kids, the best people as you talk, were already there. They were already coming to metros for their careers. So what you see as the best people being metros, half or more than half of them are actually coming from these small towns. So this was my observation. And the reason I thought they had to come to the metros was simple, that 15 or 20 years back, the infrastructure was only in the metros, the Pune, Mumbai, Bangalore of the world, of India. When I started looking out around 2015 time frame, I noticed that the infrastructure is no more the reason. You go to any district place, any taluka place, the infrastructure, the internet, power, all of them are pretty good now. And that's where the trigger came, that we could actually move the jobs to these non-metros rather than having the non-metro kids move to the metros. So that was the trigger for my starting. And because my background was in IT services, my first thought or the first application of this idea was in the services space. And that's how the company Ideas to Impacts actually got born. The fund got started a little bit later, but the Ideas to Impacts IT services company started out of this theme of delivering IT services to our global customers, but not from metros, from the smaller towns or the non-metros. Logical next step of Indian offshoring. In our IT offshoring business, people had started saying that, oh, India is too expensive. Why don't we go to Philippines, and why don't we go to Cambodia? And my simple answer was, why do you have to go to Philippines and Cambodia? You can go to Bharat. And that's how this whole smart town model of delivering from non-metros came up. I should also talk about why we call it the smart town model. We started off calling it the small town model earlier, but then we quickly realized that to be able to sustain this, it has to be on the cutting edge. Practice, we have an AI/ML practice, we have a digital practice, SAP, PLM, all of these cutting edge practices is what we are doing from these non-metros. And that's why we call it the smart town model. Of course, you may ask the question, how can you do all these things from these non-metros? And that's where our innovation kicked in, and that's what actually has made this model work. And we call it the smart town pyramid. Just as in the offshore business, you used to have an on-site offshore pyramid, we have an on-site metro and non-metro pyramid, realizing the fact that if you go to the non-metros, you are going to get very good juniors, you're going to get very good fresh candidates, but you're not going to get seniors because they have already moved to the metros. So our pyramid has the metro layer where all the seniors sit, and that's in our building in Baner, and the juniors are hired out of the non-metros, and they work out of there. So that is how this model has been quite successful, because now the seniors sitting in the metros, who are actually very experienced, 15-20 year experienced people, they have worked with the larger companies, they have done global delivery, but very crucially, they have also come in from the non-metros. They have come in from Adhure, they have come in from Aurangabad into Pune, and that's why they like this model. And then they take the onus to not only on the one hand talk to the customers, understand what they need, but on the other hand, get the teams built in their small towns or the smart towns and get the work delivered out of there. So this is what we have been able to do with the smart town model. And by the way, in passing, I must also mention that with the current situation of COVID, our model is actually getting a boost, because now everybody is getting used to remote working. And
yeah, I was about to come to that question. It's
then
good
ask
you
your
answered
question.
that. Yeah,
Yes.
that was my next
What was the
question is
question?
how's COVID-19 changed it?
Yes. Yes. So if you can easily imagine, if people were wanting work to be done out of metros, and now suddenly they see that their own employees are actually working out of non-metros and work is happening very well. So why would you not then move to able to move the work to non-metros, where there are so much other benefits of that this model can offer? And that's what we are seeing in that. See, ultimately, what we need to prove in this model, that it is not just cost, it is not just social impact. Cost is, of course, you will save a lot of money by going out to the metros. There will be a social impact of kids staying there and not coming to the metros. But ultimately, the work has to happen. The delivery has to happen well, and that's what we have achieved by that pyramid, by the seniors in Pune and the juniors in there. So the delivery was happening well. But you need a crisis like these for the mindsets of people to change. I always giving the example of Y2K. Indian offshoring was always there, but it was with Y2K 20 years back that people started believing, that mindset changed, and then suddenly Indian offshoring saw a boost in the next decade. Similar thing we believe is going to happen with our smart town model as well. We were already delivering, but now the mindsets of customers can change, and they can see that happening. Their own people working out of the non-metros, and hence we feel that the model can get a boost. In fact, we are being very innovative about it. We are even asking our customers that if your own people are now working from these remote non-metros, why don't you let them stay there? Why do you have to insist for them to come back after things become normal? Let them work from there, and we as Ideas to Impacts will build our teams and infrastructure and process around them to deliver much larger from those towns. And for you, it is a good thing, because now your own expert is actually there to take care of the delivery. So it's not even our own guy. The senior, the expert is from your team, and we are building our Ideas to Impacts team around that person. So that is the way I think COVID will actually help this model, just as Y2K helped Indian offshoring 20 years back.
Yeah, it's good you brought in Y2K, but that's the time I was completing my engineering, and that was the topic around the whole campus, like Y2K, right. And you saw a lot of work coming to India. So thank you. You give a very in-depth perspective here. So coming back to your ventures, Panthalon Ventures. Now you're investing in basically market fit B2B technology companies. Now to just share some statistics. B2B technology companies are one of the fastest rising companies among the startup ecosystem in India. So according to Zinnov, in 2018, we had 43% of the 7,400 startups in India, which were in the B2B sector, which is about 26% rise from 2014, where you had about 3,100 startups in India. So this is like about a percentage of almost 300%, to be precise, 294.8% in just 4 years. Now, of course, this is a simple percentage increase which I'm taking. So in which technology sectors have you seen an upside among your portfolio of startups? And what are, I think we did, you have already talked about the metrics, so maybe, that doesn't matter now, but where are you seeing, which space and technology where you're seeing is the major?
Okay, excellent question. Now, as a fund, clearly, Nishant, you're better at all these statistics and numbers than I am. I can never remember all these numbers, but thanks for giving me that. I see that as a perspective. I see that those things happening. It's good to know in terms of numbers that to the extent or to the scale at which these things are happening. So, as a fund, as you can imagine, we have to be always looking into the future. So, what we are trying to build as companies now, they have to have a market 5 years, 10 years down the line. So that's the very interesting role that a fund plays, and interesting for us also as fund managers to be on that cutting edge, to see where things are going, and to if possible to help with that. So, for example, one change I already talked to you about was the model part of it. From B2C, people changed to B2B. Now, B2B happens to be a horizontal, right? So you are talking about a technology, a B2B tech kind of. So you're delivering on cloud. So when you talk about SaaS, we look at B2B tech companies who are delivering with a SaaS mechanism. Now, why is SaaS important? SaaS is software as a service. You might be aware, or your audience may be aware, that earlier a lot of the software used to be delivered as a license basis. So you would, on premise, you will install the license on your servers, and that's how corporates would use the software. That is changing very fast to SaaS. That is software as a service, where the software is not installed on your servers on your premise, but it is installed somewhere on the cloud. Why is that important? Number of things. First of all, if you are installing the software on your server, do you know how difficult it used to be to project or predict what size of a server you need? The sizing of it, because you would need to know how many people will be using it. You would need to know how many people would be using it next year and year after that, and so on and so forth. So you would have to size for the growth, and that is always a very difficult thing. Whereas now, if the software is sitting in the cloud, you can always very flexibly increase or even decrease the deployment that you want to have to cater to the increasing or decreasing need that you might have. So SaaS is very popular now with corporates, because that allows them the flexibility. They don't have to commit upfront. However, it has also become very important, very useful for the startups themselves, because now with SaaS, they can be anywhere in the world and be selling to any customer anywhere else in the world. That's very, very powerful. So when we are talking about growing startups in India who are solving some kind of an Indian problem with an Indian solution but going global, you can imagine that with SaaS how much easier it becomes. They don't have to have even an office in the US. There are companies who are totally in India but selling their software anywhere in the world. So that becomes possible. You can sell over the cloud. You can support over the cloud. So almost you don't need any feet on the ground kind of salespeople, and you can be able to do that. So that is the kind of technology or the technology delivery mechanisms that our fund is going to support. So even in a horizontal sense, that's a technology that is being adopted by corporates very well. Now, underlying that, there could be various things. There could be lots of different things that are happening. IoT is happening, AI/ML is happening, cyber security is big, all of these different spaces. And again, these apply to various verticals. So it could be healthcare, it could be education, it could be retail, it could be many different logistics, transport. That's the kind of things that are happening. A lot of different technology and a lot of different verticals. So you can imagine the changes that are happening, and every day is a new day. And that keeps us on our feet and very, very excited about what we are doing. If there are any further specific questions about any particular technology, I'd be very happy to answer. But I thought, let me give you this overview first of how things are changing overall in this space.
So great. I think you gave a very, very broad, very top-down approach, and I think that's excellent. I really love the quotation plan for the size for the growth. Companies don't have to like you rightly mentioned. SaaS model, I think, became very famous with Salesforce. I mean, they revolutionized it. Now it's become ubiquitous. And I really appreciated you talked about cloud computing. Now, cloud computing is something which is really big. I mean, Microsoft makes a lot of money through cloud computing. Now, that's one of the major factors for a lot of companies, especially in the US. Also, Amazon makes a lot of money from cloud computing. Google also, but of course, for Microsoft and Amazon, cloud computing is a major part of the revenues. And I also read in a SAP report which implements ERP that maybe around, I'm not sure, but it's about 80% of the businesses coming from small businesses or from cloud computing in India. So how do you rank now cloud computing as a sector going forward? You think that's going to be really big? That's where a lot of small.
Yes. So cloud is already big. I mean, that's, like I said, is the delivery layer. I mean, all the activities happening of in the cloud. So that is fundamental to the change that has happened over the last few years.
Now you talked about B2B. Now, how would you rate B2B e-commerce sector? From one of the reports I read, it's going to become about $250 billion this year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and how do you
Yep.
think it is, the B2B, this part of sector different from US and China, uh, from what your experience is?
Maybe I should Indian kind of a situation. You can easily see how that benefits the population of India. India is a very large country. It's a very diverse country. People are very remote. So 70% probably of our population still lives in different villages and so on. So e-commerce or everything happening over internet is very, very not only it's a nice to have or something, it's a kind of a must have. So that's where things like, especially in India, the platforms like India Stack are very important. I'm sure you've heard of India Stack, which is
India
nothing
Stack,
but
yeah, India Stack,
the
right.
platform that includes Aadhaar, UPI, e-sign, e-KYC, and so on. That is going to be the major game changer for India, because otherwise, how do you think we would have included all these large populations of India that are living in remote places? And to nobody's surprise, fintech is one of the largest things that are happening with India Stack, right? So you must have heard of this JAM trilogy, like Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile. So people are able to get money directly onto their banks, in their bank account. They are able to transact through their mobiles, and that's how a lot of benefits that even government wants to give people can be passed on to the people directly. So these are these are huge things. I mean, in a lot of ways, we are actually leading the way ahead of the rest of the world. So whether it is Aadhaar, whether it is the mobile revolution that has happened, digital payments, these are spaces that we are actually leading the world. And of course, in our case, in India's case, these are required to change and transform the lives of Indians. So the things that are happening, and they have happened in a very short period of time, so to say. I mean, the whole Aadhaar project just started in 2010 or something, and then within a few years, 1.25 billion people were registered on Aadhaar, and then with their mobiles, they were able to operate their bank accounts and do e-commerce and so on. So to my mind, e-commerce is the transformational thing, or the internet, or all of these India Stack, these things are transformational, and that's how the whole Indian population is going to get included in the ecosystem, and that's what is the biggest driver for our growth. For India's growth, the biggest driver is to be able to include these large populations that are out there and who had no opportunity to get included in the financial market so far. So that's what is the very exciting thing about what is happening with e-commerce in India.
Yeah, and maybe you think, I mean, even China has done fantastic well in fintech, in Alipay. Even US, a lot of companies have used technology, especially in micro lending, microfinance space. So, there have been a lot of work going. So, if you want to look at the difference between US, China, and India, would it be like in the terms of quantum of spending for a lot of funds? That would, you will say, one of
That
the.
is true. I mean, from the fund perspective, like I said earlier, even in India, the larger funding that has happened is by the external players. And that quantum of funding is definitely a difference between what happens in India and China, US and China, and India. And clearly the B2C plays require a lot of funding. And so it is not a surprise that they happen first in outside of India, in China and in the US and so on, and then they saw the Indian opportunity, and then it happened in India as well. So you see that difference. So now, of course, B2C has happened in India as well. But otherwise, if you see that difference in the valuation that you get in the Bay Area also, for example, especially in the Bay Area and within the US, the valuations are quite higher as compared to India. But then, it could be a benefit in the other way also. In India, we have always prided ourselves in doing things frugally, for example. So I would very much appreciate if a startup is actually being able to do things with less funding, for example. And in the B2B space that I am in, that is actually possible. So we do look at B2B a little bit differently, but there are places where you need funding in much higher volume. So B2C was one example, but deep tech could be the other example. Now, let me give some examples. For example, now if you are talking about let's say we are in the COVID era right now. So if you're talking about finding a vaccine to COVID, for example, now these kind of research, these kind of initiatives will need a lot of funds, and those are the funds that are probably available in the US and China and so on. So whether it is a B2C or deep tech kind of funds where there's a lot of research required, a lot of time required to come up with the solutions and so on, even before you get a customer. See, in typical B2B that we're talking about, you find the solution, you take it to the customer revenues, and from that you can run your companies, and hence you can be frugal in terms of what kind of external funds that you're needing. So that's a typical advantage of B2B that we see, and that's why we are funding B2B companies. But when you get to something like a deep tech, where you're researching for a vaccine against a virus, then you are not going to get any revenues till the time you are in the market. That time could be large. It could be a year, for example, and there is going to be a deep research that is going to go on. And so for these kind of product developments, you need a lot of large funds, and that is where countries like in US or China could have much larger funds to deploy than what we are able to do in India.
No. So good. Thanks you for that. Now we come to I'm very keen to understand how you've been enabling the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. Just if you take the social entrepreneurship space, I think there is a lacuna here. There's a paucity of funds available in this sector. So how are you enabling a sustainable social change and impact within I would say, the social entrepreneurship ecosystem? Do you consider them as a...
Yes, thanks for that question. It's of great interest to me. I do it more as on the non-profit side of my activities. Our fund, as you know, is a Cat 1 fund, AIF Cat 1 fund, SEBI registered and all that. So it has its own thesis, and we talked about that thesis. So the activity that we do with, or I do with social entrepreneurs, is through an organization called the Pune International Center. And where do we find the social entrepreneurs? We have an annual function called the National Conference for Social Innovation, which happens in November, where we award 6 tribal, 18 people are then offered mentorship. And we found is, while the problems that these people are working on may be different than what the for-profit ones are doing, the business problems could be exactly the same. They also want to sustain, and they also want to scale. Unfortunately, the ecosystem that is available for for-profit entrepreneurs is not available for non-profit. And that is where we started this mentorship activity. And we actually do it quite structured way, in the sense that we identify what stage they are at right now. Whether do they have a product, do they have a company, do they have customers, and what is their target? Do they want to scale, or do they want to first sustain and then go to scale? Depending on what stage they are at, we chart out what stage they could be at the end of the mentorship. It's a 6-month program, and we try to get them there. And interestingly, we find that the problems of scaling and sustaining are exactly the same that you have in the for-profit. So we can help with our background to them in the areas of their interest, in the problems that they have identified, and we can help them grow in that. And we have got some very good success stories, and especially in the COVID period, some of them have been very active with coming up with repurposing their products. Somebody's building face shields, somebody's building UV based instruments for disinfecting face masks and other PP clothes and so on. So all of those activities are give a lot of to see all of our mentees doing all these kind of interesting things gives us a great satisfaction and pride, actually.
Oh, great. So, we keep on, since you're from technology space and, you have been a leader in the tech industry, the first question I think, keeps coming to everybody's mind is artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. So how do you think is the artificial intelligence not only evolving in India, but globally? Just to give one figure, according to Accenture, AI could add about $1 trillion to Indian economy by 35. So it's just one figure, but it's not only the terms of. I just want to understand how the social impact is coming, because a lot of work in artificial intelligence still goes in with companies like, I mean, I think Amazon is one of the largest investors in this particular sector. You have, the top companies, Facebook, and it's predominantly in e-commerce sector. From what a lot of things are changing, maybe driverless cars are going to be, incorporating artificial intelligence. So I would love to know how this sector is evolving from your perspective.
No, absolutely. I mean, we cannot have such kind of a discussion without talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. AI ML has achieved that kind of a stature in our world today, and not just in our startup ecosystem. I have to say that when we are looking at all the startups or the deal flow that comes to us, most of them, if not all of them, have something or the other to do with AI ML. Now, they are not, we are looking at the use cases of AI ML into particular application areas, but it's very rare to find these days a startup that is not using AI ML in a particular kind of a way. Now, I have to say that, AI ML is just not another technology. It's a complete different, way of doing things because of the way things are being done. So it is not as we earlier used to do, learn a business process, see what rules are being followed, implement those rules as a program, and that's how you automate a particular process. Now here we are trying to see what we can learn out of the data that has already happened. You take a lot of data, you see what all has already happened, and based on that, let the machine learn the rules rather than set the rules. So that is a completely different paradigm, and we are only in the beginning of this revolution that is happening with AI/ML. So, I would not put it as just another new technology. It's a completely different way of doing things. And as a fund, we find it. I'll talk about how I look at it as a fund, how I look at it as ideas to impacts, and various ways. But as a fund, I'll tell you that there are various layers to AI/ML. So, there are some platforms of AI. So, IBM Watson is the most famous, but there are other companies. TCS has built something called Ignio, and all of these different companies have their own platforms, which basically allow, end to end, right from data ingestion to, the analyzing of the data, all of that to finally the visualization of it. So all of that, is provided by the platform. Now, what does the platform need? It requires a lot of data to first come in. So there is a lot of services that are required in terms of processing data. So if the machine has to learn, then you have to provide a lot of data for that machine to learn. Now, the data comes in from various sources. The data comes in from people entering the data when they are on the internet. It comes from IoT. It comes from, or it comes from the databases that corporates have, for example. Data comes from various different places. Now this data has to be processed. The data has to be sometimes cleaned, sometimes curated, sometimes synthetic data has to be created. Now you talked about autonomous driving. Now, that it is machine learning. So that a lot of video data is being fed into this machine for that machine to learn about traffic, and that's how it's making its own decision. By literally millions of videos are being fed into this machine for them to learn how the traffic is happening, and that's how the machine learns. Now let me ask you this: what are the most critical situations to be handled in the traffic? Now those situations are actually accidents, right? These are the corner cases that happen in traffic. Now where do you get that data? Most of the data that you'll get from traffic videos is the normal data. So how will you get the accident data? That is where the synthetic data creation comes into place. That you have to create this data, and people have used video games for that matter, for example, to create these kind of accident cases that are being used. And this is an example of video I gave that because everybody know this particular use case of driving and traffic and so on. But this particular synthetic data creation has to happen in CAD, has to happen in text, all kinds of data. So almost by data type, you can have different data that can be processed in different ways and synthetic data created. So you have a lot of services industry that is getting built. So on the one hand, you're talking about AI ML killing jobs, but there are these different kinds of jobs that are getting created also as we speak. Now, interestingly, what is now being realized is for AI ML, a lot of this service component will be required. It is not, as I said earlier, there is a services, kind of a sector. There is a product kind of a sector. AI ML could be a different kind of a sector altogether, not completely product, not completely services. It will need a lot of services, and you build on top of the platform that I talked about. So we talked about the services which are needed to process the data. We talked about a platform which that takes that data in and processes it and so on in a horizontal kind of a way. But then finally, you're talking about building vertical solutions on top of these kind of platforms, because ultimately it is a use case that matters. So you have to have an AML solution for your radiology, and those are the kind of starters.
Yeah,
that
even
we have.
robotics. Yeah,
Yeah, robotics. We are actually in our fund. We have funded radiology, AI-based radiology startup, which also happens to be in our building called Deep Tech, and
you're right.
we have
So
funded that. So yeah, so there has to be these vertical solutions that have to come on top of that. Then they're actually helping the end user or the consumer or the customer. So this is this whole ecosystem of AI/ML, which I talked about, from the raw data to the platform that processes the data, and finally the vertical solutions for individual use cases that are coming out of that. So that's the whole span of AI/ML. So you see a lot of things to be done, and a lot of ways that our life is going to be transformed because of AI and ML.
you're right. Like, so coin has got two sides. This one is a very dangerous side. Is like AI is being used to sort of nudge us into buying. A lot of in e-commerce, buying goods maybe which you don't need, and trying to sort of map your brain up. But you are also very correct. Like, it's sort of transforming other sectors. Right. It's just a separate field altogether. And talking about AI, we came to one of the most important and most exciting technology, blockchain. Now, blockchain has not only revolutionized businesses but also in social sector. For just to give you an example, like, blockchain is given actually about 100% where CAGR in terms of the number of startups in India. Now, going on around the world where blockchain is being used, maybe in healthcare sector, also in social sector, like a lot of African countries. I've read some African countries have also implemented blockchain in healthcare, because it brings in a lot of accountability. So would you like to, speak on blockchain here, how it's transforming in your opinion, how much weightage would you give? Or
Sure. I mean, our hub, Ideas to Impacts Hub, does have a few blockchain technology startups as well. Clearly, it's a very important technology. The problem it is solving is of trust, and if you can automate this trust issue, then there are going to be a number of ways that it can be used. It is coming up in terms of the different use cases that it can be used for, and we will see more and more of these startups definitely coming up in the years to come. Clearly, we talked about cloud, which has already become the norm. We talked about AI/ML, which is coming, which also has taken it's growing in its path. So blockchain is also going to get there because of the problem that it solves, and its use cases are still being evolved. So you will see a number of use cases come up for blockchain, and they are going to transform. There is also a flip side of it that sometimes you have the technology, you have a hammer, and you are looking for a nail. So sometimes these technologies get applied to use cases that are not so so fittingly useful. But that always happens with when a new technology comes up. So I am definitely hopeful that as blockchain grows, it will find its specific use cases that it can be used at, and then that's how it will transform our society and our world.
talked about transformation. Are you looking at how some very few specific sectors which you think would be very critical? You talked about healthcare. I think you also talked about education. Apart
Yes.
from these two, are you looking at any other sectors which you feel
like I talked about earlier, fintech, it's going to make a huge difference in
Right.
India in terms of the enablement, enabling it does of the financial inclusion of the large populations of India is extremely important for India. All these sectors that can benefit out of remote working, especially in the COVID situation, are going to get a big boost. And you'll see that happening in healthcare. You'll see that happening in edutech. Right, already we are seeing that all students are studying from home these days, videos, and all of these are going to become norms. I mean, it always happens that with something big like COVID happening, then the normal changes. But it never goes from 0 to 1. It always stabilizes in between somewhere. It never remains the complete old. It never becomes a new, complete new, and it will, come to an equilibrium somewhere in between. But certainly, the world will change quite a bit. I myself now, for example, have been working remotely from home, and I see that a lot of work that you felt you had to go to office now can be done out of out of home. But of course, you'll need the office. So there will be an equilibrium that will happen. But the digitalization that you're talking about is definitely going to help us navigate the new normal that is going to happen with COVID in almost all the sectors that you can think of.
Coming to social impact, you have been you're the president and of the executive committee of I4C. So you've done a lot of initiatives, including the Smart India Hackathon, which drives innovation among students in India. Now, I did speak to Mr. Ramanan, who is the mission director at Atal Innovation Mission, and they have a wonderful initiative, which is Tinkering Labs initiative, where they go to the schools and do a lot of innovation, drive innovation among the students at a younger age. Mm-hmm. So, do share your insights about how the mindset of students has changed over the years, and especially in problem-solving abilities through experiments. And how do you see yourself, your initiative, Smart India Hackathon, and complementing with what Atal Innovation Mission is also doing?
No, the Smart India Hackathon is in collaboration with AICTE, which is the nodal agency of all engineering colleges in India, and the Ministry of HRD of the central government. So what Smart India Hackathon does is every year conduct now both software and hardware competitions of letting students solve the problems that are actually given by the various ministries of the Indian and the state governments, as well as corporates. So what we have enabled with this Smart India Hackathon is essentially giving a chance to for students to work on real problems. See, what we realize is that the students have a lot of energy, lot of enthusiasm. They have a lot of technology savvy as well. But if they're not given the real problems, they will use it for different things, because ultimately as students you don't have the exposure, you don't have the experience to know the real problems. So what Smart India Hackathon has really done is put this energy, put this force onto the real problems of India that have come from the ministries and corporates, and you see wonderful results. I've been part of this organization of the Smart India Hackathon through I4C, the company that the non-profit company, it is Pune based, that works with AICTE and MHRD. And I've been to Hubli in the first year I was actually at the Hubli Center, and I could see the energy and enthusiasm of the student in action. Sometimes people complain whether students are using their time the best possible way, they are making use of facilities that are available to them, they're getting into doing wrong things. But to me, I feel that they have all the wherewithal, they have the savvy, they have the energy, they have the enthusiasm. Only thing they were lacking was the real good problems that they should be solving. And even about the output of the hackathons, to me, it's the process of hackathon. What the students learn while doing that hackathon is so much more useful in their lives in the future, rather than what they come up with. I mean, if they actually come up with a product and if they actually start a startup using that idea, fantastic. But even if that doesn't happen, I know that their lives change, for the better just by participating in the hackathon. And for sure, in their future, after the education is over, they will do some kind of a startup, and that's the hope. Because ultimately, the future of India lies a lot in what the youngsters are going to do with the startups. A change happens with the smaller companies and the startups, and that's where I think the initiatives like hackathons help, because that's what gives the opportunity for students to work with their own hands and to bring some solutions up for some real problems. And this process that they've gone to is going to make them definitely try in their future lives some kind of innovation, some kind of startups, which is going to help change the course for India. So that is how I think the Smart India Hackathon helps. And this is where whatever Atal Innovation Mission is doing with tinkering labs, as you mentioned, is exactly the same thing. Even at a younger age, even the schools, if you give them the opportunity to work on real problems and solve them by their own hands, they will be innovative when the future in the future, when the opportunity arises for them, as compared to when the model of education was more of giving exams, written exams, and get some degrees and certificates and so on. Degrees and certificates are not going to be useful. Things are going to be in a continuous change mode in the future for these students. And for that, they have to be innovative. They cannot hope that a degree certificate is going to get through their entire career. That's not going to happen at all. So for them, it's very important that they become innovative. They become, very easily adapting to changes, and that's what these hackathons and these tinkering labs are helping them in their during their education, so that they adapt to this changing world of the future that they're going to face in a much more successful way, and also then help the world change due to their innovation.
Oh, cool. Okay. And you think, like you missed it on a lighter note, you think if you had this excess when you were a kid, you could have so much done differently things, you feel?
Oh, absolutely. I've said this often whenever I go to the student event, that I almost envy them, the kind of facilities they're getting, and what they're doing. I mean, you just have to talk to kids to see how much more they know than what you knew when they were their age, right? So it's not even funny. I mean, it's a fact of life today that these kids know so much more, and I certainly envy the facilities that they're getting. And you will see, because of that, the things will change much faster than we think. I mean, we have had our time of 20, 30 years to grow our businesses and so on and so forth. But these kids are going to make the changes much faster and much more dramatically than what we were able to do, because of the knowledge that they have, the facilities that they have, and the way they are looking at this world. It's totally different, and that is what we need, actually, this new set of eyes. I always say that to know a problem, you probably need experience, and with the experience in a particular domain, the experience of living life, you know that there are problems. But to solve the problems, you probably need the youth, the ability to think differently, and that's what this new generation brings. And I definitely envy them, but also look forward to they coming up with the solutions for us to getting into this new world.
Yeah, true. I think a lot of education has got revolutionized, specifically from the Nordic countries, Finland and how Switzerland, and even Germany. They brought in a lot of concepts of experiments and the experiment-driven education. I think that
yes. And that is what you see when even in Ideas to Impacts Hub. I talked about mingling between startups, but even when I take a walk, if you can meet the youngsters, working on different things, that's such a energizing thing for you also. So it's definitely good for somebody like me to have this opportunity to work with students in school, to work with students in college through these hackathons, and to work with youngsters who are working in startups and the founders in our building. So that definitely is something that I really feel I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to do.
And it's very good is like you're also sort of incorporating those changes, and you're giving it back to the society, and you're giving it to the future generation.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. So and that is I think a very big very sustainable, I'll say, social impact which are giving to the society. Now I'll come to my second last question. Of course, last question is always the aha question from the middle road. But so we talked about so much of education now. When you come to Ideas to Impacts, it has implemented a lot of projects in the edtech for edtech companies. Now, according to NASSCOM 2018 startup report, about 11% of the social startups in India are from the edtech. So how do you think this sector is evolving in India? And what could be the key drivers for growth here in India and globally? Or what do you think is the difference? Maybe what do you think could be, and what are the very critical key performance indicators which I could be looking at, or people should be looking at?
Actually, I just now touched upon that. So it's good that you're asking this question. And to me, education needs to change dramatically to meet the needs of the future. I mean, we talked about that, right? The technology is changing so fast that, let's say somebody is entering a college, and it's a 4-year course. You know, and I know that after 4 years, what kind of jobs that person is going to get is not known. The jobs may be completely new, they may not be even existing now. Now, how are you going to do this? I mean, how is even the college going to give you a 4-year degree course and prepare for your future when the jobs that you are supposed to get are not even existing when you're entering the college? So that's the kind of challenge that education faces. It's a much bigger challenge than just calling it edtech or what kind of solutions or remote education that we can bring to technology. Education has far bigger challenges in terms of how it meets the needs of the future. And for example, we know that earlier people used to have one job in their careers. In my generation, maybe 3, 4, 5 jobs, and now they're going to have different, not only jobs but even different careers in their. So they must keep continuously training themselves, right? They cannot be satisfied with a 4-year degree and think that they will get through the career with that. So education has to cater to not just students or children and youngsters, but also to more mature people, for example, who have had their first careers and second careers and now looking for change in career. That has to happen. So that are the aspects that we didn't even talk about in terms of education, leveraging the technology that is available to deliver education in different kinds of ways. The technology itself is changing. So how do you upgrade the content so that newer and newer technologies are being taught? So that's the other challenge that EdTech has to face.
Cool. Or it could be also like, maybe short-term courses are more
Exactly.
important, which you feel like maybe than
Exactly.
degrees and more pre-training.
Exactly.
And you think vocational training also could be another sector where maybe lot of work is being done.
100%. Ultimately, people are going to get educated for the work that they are going to do, and these are going to be shorter term courses because these needs are going to change continuously, and these are going to be vocational courses because today there is statistics that a lot of people are becoming engineers by doing these 4-year degree courses. They are not finding jobs on the one hand, whereas there are a lot of jobs that are going begging because there are not enough people who can do those jobs. There are a lot of plumbing and welding jobs that are going without finding people to do that, and the engineers, because they got trained as engineers, are not now suitable for these kind of jobs. So there are all kinds of these mismatches which will be which some entrepreneurs will find as an opportunity, and with the help of technology find solutions to those kind of requirements.
Okay, great. Wonderful. It's been a very long chat, and I come to the last question. We've been, we touched on a lot of topics. We not only touched about startup, we went to social ecosystem, we went to social entrepreneurship, we looked at digital transformation, AI, we looked at blockchain, we looked at various technologies within the technology game. And now I come to you as your last question, which is from the middle road. Do tell us any of your aha moments, which brings back happiness, which brings a smile to your lips. Anything which like to talk about it.
Right. So one of the good things I remember, is that I started my entrepreneurship journey at a very young age. I knew nothing about it, but the young age is when also the risks are very little, and I actually benefited of starting just after a couple of years of experience. I started into it, and it was very hard. I learned. In fact, my first venture that I did, I actually call it as my MBA, because that's how I learned about business. I had no idea earlier. I didn't come from a business family, but that is how I got learned the ropes of it, and then that benefited me throughout my entire journey. So I was very young then, and I was able to make a success of my earlier ventures. But as I grow into career now, it's about 30 years that I've been in the career. What I really find rewarding is the opportunity as an entrepreneur, or the journey that I'm having, to continuously work with younger people. So initially I was the young one, and I built a team of young people, and that I grew that into a company of software testing professionals. But then after that, I remember having an average, age in my company to be 23, 24, something like that in the beginning. And then that company grew to 1,000 people. So it became a mature company. It got acquired and became a standard. It couldn't be called a startup then. And I remember saying, when I exited out of the last company when it grew to about 1,000 people, saying that the average age had gone to 31, and so time to change. And then I started Ideas to Impacts. The age is again gone back to 23. and then that's that's the thing that you enjoy, that you continuously keep working with youngsters. That's how you not only keep learning, you keep yourself young. Again, you start a fund, you start working with startup founders who are not only youngsters, but again, they remind you of what you were, when you were that age and you started your own company. So when you have a fund and an incubator, you again get that opportunity of working with youngsters, and very, very innovative and enterprising youngsters, and that keeps you not only young, keeps you learning all the time, and I would say keeps you giving these aha moments on a daily basis almost, rather than having this one big aha moment. So for me, luckily for me, the career has been such that every new stage has been more interesting than a previous stage. So while the college days is something that everybody likes and so on and so forth, for me every new stage has been even more interesting and exciting, including the current stage, where as a fund, as an incubator, I get a chance to meet all these youngsters who are some of the leaders of tomorrow and are giving me these aha moments almost on a daily basis, like I said.
So thank you, Giri, for sharing a very poignant journey and giving a fantastic perspective. So thanks for giving time, for taking time, and sharing a wonderful perspective. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate
Nishant, I must thank you. This was a great pleasure to do this discussion chat with you. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope your audience enjoys it too.
Yeah, thank you.